שלום, צהריים טובים, ברוכים הבאים לאוניברסיטה הפתוחה. אני זאב רוזנהק, ראש המחלקה לסוציולוגיה, מדעי המדינה בתקשורת. כבוד גדול הוא לי לפתוח את הכנס שלנו היום בנושא דת, אומה ודמוקרטיה, משולש בעין הסערה. אנחנו היום מתחילים את הכנס, והכנס יימשך ביום ראשון הבא, שבו במהלך כל היום אנחנו נקיים 5 מושבים. הכנס הזה הוא מאוד חשוב לנו באוניברסיטה הפתוחה, ובפרט במחלקה לסוציולוגיה, מדע המדינה ותקשורת, לא רק בגלל הסוגיות, הנושאים המרתקים שאנחנו נדון בהן במהלכו, אלא גם ואולי בעיקר מפני שהכנס הזה הוא לכבודו של חברנו פרופסור בני נויברגר לרגל פרישתו לגמלאות. ביום ראשון תהיה לי הזדמנות לדבר אולי טיפה יותר על בני ופועלו החשוב, אבל גם היום אני רוצה לציין ממש בקצרה מספר נקודות. בני שייך לדור המייסדים של האוניברסיטה הפתוחה, הוא הצטרף אליה בשנת 1978, שנים מעטות ממש לאחר שהאוניברסיטה פתחה את שעריה. זה ממש בלתי אפשרי, אבל ממש בלתי אפשרי, להפריז בתרומה של בני למחלקה שלנו, לאוניברסיטה, וגם לדיסציפלינה של מדעי המדינה באופן כללי. הוא למעשה ייסד את תחום מדעי המדינה באוניברסיטה, הוא ייסד את מה שהיום היא המחלקה לסוציולוגיה, מדע המדינה ותקשורת. הוא גם יזם וייסד את התוכנית לתואר שני בלימודי דמוקרטיה אצלנו באוניברסיטה הפתוחה, שבזמנו כאשר בני יזם את הפרויקט החשוב הזה, הייתה התוכנית הראשונה, היחידה למעשה בארץ בלימודי דמוקרטיה. אני חושב שהיום יש לפחות עוד 2 תוכניות שלמעשה נבנו על בסיס המודל שבני עיצב. בני גם פרסם כמות מאוד מאוד גדולה של ספרים ומאמרים אקדמיים בנושאים של פוליטיקה ישראלית, דת ומדינה, פוליטיקה וחברה באפריקה, ולצד המפעל של פרסומים אקדמיים רחב ומקיף כזה, הוא גם פיתח כמות אדירה של קורסים כאן באוניברסיטה הפתוחה. הוא פיתח קורסים, הוא כתב ספרים לקורסים, הוא כתב פרקים של חומר לימודים אצלנו באוניברסיטה, בסדר גודל של 10 ספרים בפרקים. אמנם עד כה את המשפט האחרון אני ניסחתי בלשון עבר, אבל למעשה גם היום בני ממשיך להיות מעורב באופן אינטנסיבי בפיתוח של קורסים חדשים ובעדכון של קורסים קיימים, ואני מאמין, אני משוכנע שהוא גם יהיה מעורב בעתיד בפיתוח ובעדכון של חומר לימודים. אמנם אנו מציינים היום את פרישתו הפורמלית, וכאן אני רוצה להדגיש, הפורמלית של בני לגמלאות, אולם אני בטוח שאנחנו במחלקה ואנחנו באוניברסיטה נמשיך ליהנות מנוכחותו החשובה והכל כך נעימה של בני, וגם מתרומתו הגדולה. פשוט עכשיו זה יהיה מתוך מעמדו החדש של פרופסור אמריטוס. תרשו לי להודות לדוקטור דניס שרביט, שיזם וארגן את הכנס הזה, גם לדפנה גרינבוים ולצוותה, שכמו תמיד, ובזה אין שום דבר יוצא דופן, הם עשו עבודה נפלאה, שלמעשה, ובכך הם תרמו רבות לקיום של הכנס הזה, לקיום המוצלח, אני בטוח, של הכנס הזה. אני רוצה עכשיו לעבור לשלב נוסף של ברכות. אנחנו ראינו שחלק מהאנשים כאן מחזיקים בגרסה קודמת של התוכנית, שבה מצוין שפרופסור חגית מסר ירון, נשיאת האוניברסיטה הפתוחה, היא תישא דברי ברכה. חגית, היה איזה שינוי בלתי צפוי בתוכנית של הנסיעות לחוץ לארץ, ולכן היא לא יכולה להיות נוכחת. בכל מקרה היא שולחת ומוסרת את הברכות החמות לבני עם פרישתו, ואני רוצה להזמין את פרופסור יהודית גל עזר, שהיא סגנית הנשיאה של האוניברסיטה הפתוחה, לשאת דברי ברכה.
שלום לכולם, כל האורחים הנכבדים, יש בו הרבה כאלה, אז אני לא אקרא בשמותיהם, אבל אני מודה לכולם שהגיעו לאירוע המיוחד הזה, ואני עומדת כאן נרגשת משהו, קצת שמחה להיות באירוע הזה, אבל עם עצב בלב על עצם האירוע, אבל בעיקר נרגשת לפתוח בדברי ברכה לאחת מדמויות הענק של האוניברסיטה הפתוחה ובכלל, בני שלנו. בדרך כלל באירועים כאלה אני נוהגת לספר קצת על האוניברסיטה הפתוחה, על הייחוד שלה בנוף האקדמי של ישראל, אבל היום כל דבריי יהיו מוקדשים לך בני, ואני אתחיל בכך שאני אקרא דברים שכתבתי במכתב על בני לפני 1.5 בערך. חלק מהדברים חזרה על דברים שאנדי אמר עכשיו, אבל כמו בהוראה ובחינוך, שיטת הספירלה, תשמעו את זה פעמיים, זה ייטמע עוד יותר טוב. אז כך כתבתי על בני. פרופסור נויברגר עוסק בחקר אפריקה יותר מ40 שנים, מאז שהיה המוסמך הראשון בלימודי אפריקה באוניברסיטה העברית. הוא נחשב חוקר מוביל בסוגיית הלאומיות האפריקנית, לאומיות אנטי-קולוניאלית, עקרון ההגדרה העצמית באפריקה, פן-אפריקניזם, לאומיות והיסטוריה, לאומיות פוסט-קולוניאלית. בסוגיית קשר בין לאומיות אפריקנית, יהדות וציונות, דימוי היהודים והיהדות, היחס לציונות, ציונות שחורה, ובסוגיית הבעיה האתנית במדינות אפריקה, אסטרטגיות לבניין אומה, קונפליקטים אתניים, בדלנות, היווצרות קבוצה אתנית בתקופה הקולוניאלית והפוסט-קולוניאלית. נושאים אחרים בחקר אפריקה אותם חקר הם בתחום היחסים הבינלאומיים. אפריקה ביחסים הבינלאומיים, יחסי לוב אפריקה, בריטניה אפריקה, ישראל אפריקה, ארצות הברית אפריקה. המשטרים והפוליטיקה, דמוקרטיה, דמוקרטיזציה ודה-דמוקרטיזציה. דיקטטורות חד-מפלגתיות וצבאיות, ורצח העם ברואנדה. בין השאר הגורם האידיאולוגי, תורת הגזע ותגובת מדינות העולם. באוניברסיטה הפתוחה פרופסור בני נויברגר פיתח קורסים רבים מאוד, בחלקם הגדול עוסקים בלימודי אפריקה. הוא ממניחי היסוד של תחום מדע המדינה על היבטיו השונים, ומי שהוביל ועומד בראש התוכנית לתואר שני בלימודי דמוקרטיה בינתחומיים, שהייתה הראשונה מסוגה בארץ בעת מיסודה. פרופסור נויברגר עומד בראש התוכנית הבין אוניברסיטאית ללימודי אפריקה, בשותפות עם אוניברסיטת תל אביב, האוניברסיטה העברית ואוניברסיטת בן גוריון, היום רק אוניברסיטת בן גוריון, אז זה היה אחרת, שזכתה לעידוד ולתמיכת ות"ת ויד הנדיב. אז מה עוד נחוץ? אז זהו. לכל זה לא כתבתי אז, לכל זה נוסף הממד האנושי, נעים הליכות, רגוע, לעולם לא יפגע באיש, מחזק ומעודד, וכבר אמרתי מעמודי התווך של האוניברסיטה הפתוחה. בני, אני מאחלת לך עוד הרבה שנות פעילות, תישאר כמו שאתה. בהערכה ובאהבה.
תודה רבה יהודית. ברשותכם אני אעבור עכשיו לאנגלית כדי להציג את האורח שלנו, פרופסור ויליאם ספרן. אמנם פרופסור ספרן הוא דובר עברית, יצא לי עכשיו לפני שהתחלנו את המושב, הייתה לי הזדמנות לשוחח איתו בעברית בלי שום בעיה, אבל את ההרצאה שלו הוא יציג, הוא ייתן באנגלית ואני אציג אותו גם באנגלית. We are very much honored to have with us as keynote speaker today Professor William Safran, who is a Professor Emeritus of Political Science from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Professor Safran is a very prominent scholar in the fields of comparative European politics and in the study of the politics of ethnicity, nationalism, and citizenship. He has published extensively on issues of multiculturalism, immigration, diaspora formation, religion, and collective identity. He has written and edited more than 10 books and published dozens and dozens of academic articles on these topics. His keynote address today is entitled Nationalism, Religion and Democracy, an Ambiguous Relationship. After Professor Safran's lecture, we will open the floor for a few questions, and then Professor Neuberger will close this session with some general remarks on the relationship between religion, the nation, and democracy, which are, of course, a very timely topic, of course, in Israel, but also all over the world. Professor Safran, please.
תודה רבה. אני מאוד שמח להיות פה ולהשתתף בכנס הזה לכבוד בני נויברגר, ואני רוצה להודות הפרופסור שרביט והפרופסור רוזנק שהזמינו אותי. בני ואני מכירים אחד השני הרבה שנים, שנים של כנסים ופאנלים ביחד, מחקר באותם נושאים ומאמרים באותם ספרים. השפה העברית היא לא שפה טבעית שלי. לכן אני ארצה באנגלית, אני מצטער. אני מקווה שזאת לא תהיה בעיה גדולה פה, כי נדמה לי שכמעט כל אחד מדבר וכותב אנגלית, ואם יש בעיות, אולי יש לכם שכן שיכול לתרגם. Nationalism, Religion and Democracy, a tour d'horizon of an ambiguous relationship. Nations and religion are comparable in many ways. Each promises salvation, celebrates common festivals, and embraces myths and narratives of origin. Each is equipped with dogma, saints, and holy symbols such as crosses and flags, and each is associated with a community. Both have high priests and institutions of social control. Both reflect the human propensity to identify with an in-group and to oppose out-groups, in terms of which they are self-defined and which serve as boundary markers. Both find narrow expression in ethnic identity. Both have orthodoxies, make monopolistic claims, and reject rival allegiances. It is unclear whether the combativeness of nationalists or religious extremists is due to hubris or insecurity. The heathen, heretic, or apostate is to a dominant religion what the barbarian, alien, or traitor is to a nation or state. Both nationalism and religion have resorted to violence and oppression in the name of what they perceive as the greater good or the purer idea. Both have made conquests by the sword, and these have been equally deadly. Both are human inventions, as Eric Hobsbawm insists, and are equally embracing and exclusivist. According to pure constructivists, states invent nations as well as nationalism, but neither can be constructed simply by the will of a nation builder. The raw material consists of a sufficiently large number of people with common sentiments based on common experiences. A people is not a construct because it cannot be invented out of nothing, contrary to the claims of certain Israelis that Jews are an invented people. You know whom I mean, of course. Or certain Americans, a presidential candidate, Gingrich, that Palestinians are an invented people. I suspect that some who agree with one side don't agree with the other. Religion is often the foundation of the state, of the nation, and of nationalism. Before the modern era, it was the ecclesiarch who played a leading political role. This fact was reflected in the doctrine of the two swords. Under the Holy Roman Empire, there was a functional role division between the emperor, the terrestrial power, and the pope, the spiritual power. The pope anointed the emperor. The supremacy of the church was unchallenged because the modern state did not yet exist. Today, this supremacy is personified symbolically in monarchs as defenders of the faith. Traditionally, state and nation were based on religion, cuius religio eos natio. Under the Westphalian arrangement, religion in Europe was based on the preference of the ruler and therefore of the state, cuius regio eos religio. To be sure, the ruler did not create religion out of thin air. He inherited one in some form and reformulated, institutionalized, and manipulated it. Which causal order has been dominant? God's people, I suppose for Jews it was amesegula, and their religion, which reflected a special relationship with God, made them seek political expression as a nation. In the pre-democratic age, there were many states based on religion. Today, there are still a number of states or potential states whose national identity continues to be strongly associated with a particular religion. Among them, Armenia, Greece, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Pakistan, Poland, Punjab, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Tibet. Some modern states have been led by clergy. For example, Tibet, the Nazi puppet state Slovakia, and Iran. The congruence between religion and nation is most noticeable in the case of what a sociologist called Kleinreligionen, small religions. Those of particular ethno-national communities such as Judaism, Apostolic Christianity, Sikhism, Tibetan Buddhism, as opposed to Großreligionen, big religions, which have a significant global reach. Dar al-Islam is transnational, but Arab nationalism is inconceivable without Islam. There was an exception. During the anti-colonial struggle for independence, Muslim and Christian Arabs were united under the slogan, "Religion belongs to God, while the fatherland belongs to us all." In any case, the difference between the two types of religion is not absolute. Small religions often have a universal message. Judaism has claimed the role of Or Lagoyim, and Sikhism regards itself as a religion aimed at establishing brotherhood for all mankind. Conversely, global religions are made accessible or operationalized in ethno-national garb. Thanks. Religion and nationalism may be hostile to each other. They may compete for loyalty, or they may reinforce each other, as in the case of the BJP in India, which associates nationalism with Hinduism, and in Israel, Mafdal and its successor, Habayit HaYehudi, with its mutually reinforcing view of Judaism and Zionism, and more currently elements of the Chardalim, who claim Jewish ownership of the whole biblical Israel. It is possible for a person to shift his primary loyalty from religion to nation, and vice versa. Both religion and nationality are primordial givens, as Benedict Anderson calls it. They are inherited and ascriptive. Yet, a nation may be freely chosen by immigration, or it may be abandoned by emigration and the adoption of another nationality. Converts to the dominant faith are comparable to naturalized citizens. They may opt out of a religious community and join another. But converts are not always accepted. Just as in the eyes of the French right, French nationality must be deserved, so is admission to the faith in the eyes of Orthodox Jews. Self-identification as a member of a national or religious community is not always accepted by others. Conversely, exit is not always easy. Nationalism is often regarded as secularized religion. On the other hand, religion may be a substitute for nationalism or patriotism. Genuinely religious persons may become martyrs in the name of the faith, al-Kiddush Hashem, just as genuine patriots may die for the fatherland. But religion, like patriotism, can also be the last refuge of scoundrels, to paraphrase Samuel Johnson. Modern nationalism tends to be secular, but modern politicians often invoke religion for purposes of mass mobilization. Religion may soften nationalism, or it may sanctify nationalistic excesses. Slobodan Milosevic invoked the memory of an Eastern Orthodox presence in Kosovo, and the commemoration of the Battle of Kosovo Polje has been both a religious and national one. Protestants invoked anti-papist sentiments to keep Ulster in the British fold. In Poland before 1990, Catholicism served as a means to oppose communism, and ultra-Orthodox Judaism has been used to oppose Zionism and the existence of Israel itself. Both religion and patriotism may be harnessed for selfish interests. In the US, for example, evangelical preachers in mega churches exploit the yearning for salvation and hide behind the cloak of religion in order to get rich. Corporate executive officers in defense industries exploit patriotism in order to earn millions by instigating wars in the name of national interest. And tycoons promote a form of Christian libertarianism to wage war against the poor. Apropos, I recently saw a cartoon about evangelicals with the wording, "Fuck the sick and the poor, we love Jesus." For these reasons, there are those who reject both religion and nationalism, the former in the name of reason, and the latter in the name of humanism, individualism, or cosmopolitanism. The relationship between nationalism and democracy is complex and ambiguous. One must distinguish among several types of nationalism. One, the authoritarian nationalisms of Tsarist Russia and Hohenzollern Prussia. Two, romantic nationalism, that of Herder for example, which had no clear political form, and that of Heinrich Heine, which was influenced by the French Revolution. 3, the nationalism of democracy, that of the Italian Risorgimento, the French Revolution, the American Declaration of Independence, and modern Zionism. None of these nationalisms, however, is completely democratic. Mazzini based his nationalism on a romantic notion of Gemeinschaft. That of the French Revolution was, according to Jacob Talmon, totalitarian, because it emphasized the general will at the expense of individual rights. And American democracy developed in the context of slavery. Democratic nationalism also includes the nationalisms of selected sub-Saharan African countries, insofar as they prepared the ideological grounds for democracy. Unfortunately, democracy was not fully achieved by most of them once independent statehood was established. 4, the integral nationalism of Charles Maurras, of the Action Française, and of Italian, German, and Spanish fascisms, which were decidedly anti-democratic. 5, the modernizing nationalisms of the Meiji Restoration in Japan in the 1860s, Sun Yat-sen's anti-monarchical revolution in 1911, and Kemal Atatürk's revolution after World War I, all of which were inspired not by democratic impulses, but by anti-foreigner sentiments. 6, colonial nationalism, the nationalisms of settlers coming into a colony from a core imperialistic country, who sought independence from that country, either because they felt exploited by it or because they had their own exploitative and often racist agenda, including slavery. This applied to British settlers in Rhodesia, Dutch settlers in South Africa, Spanish settlers in South America, and European settlers in the American colonies. 7, anti-colonial nationalism. This is associated with national liberation or self-determination, but as Benny Neuberger has pointed out in a number of articles, not necessarily with the liberation of self-determination or self-determination of the individual within the nation. Neuberger has made a distinction between what he calls big versus small self-determination. Arguably, individuals, especially those belonging to ethno-religious minorities, enjoyed greater freedoms in the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire than they did as members in most independent successor nations. The same can be said for the citizens of African countries after their liberation from colonial rule. 8, Jewish diaspora nationalism. This was a movement of fin de siècle East European Jewry, popularized by Shimon Dubnov and associated with the Bund. It did not aim at political independence, and its connection with religion was ambiguous, if not hostile. 9, and I guess this is a new kind of nationalism, long-distance nationalism, the kind that has become important with globalization, the weakening of national sovereignties, and the increasing tempo of migration, and is associated with contemporary diasporas. It represents an identity focused on an original homeland or a myth about it, and is often a form of nostalgia. This kind of nationalism used to exemplify Benedict Anderson's imagined community, but it no longer does, owing to the permeability of political boundaries, the ease of travel, and the growth of cyber communications. It is the kind of modern nationalism most closely connected with religion as seen in the Armenian, Greek, and Jewish cases. 10, and this too is new. The nationalism of the contemporary radical right, as in France and other European countries. It is populist, anti-elitist, and sometimes anti-democratic, and is a reaction to the economic injustices attributed to globalization. Paradoxically, it may be summoned up by the very forces that created these injustices, such as the corporate and financial elite in the United States. The Jacobin nationalism that developed with the French Revolution is associated with democracy in two ways: the legitimation of the state by popular sovereignty and the creation of a citizen army. But one must be careful. Citizen nations or civic nations, as opposed to ethnic ones, are not necessarily democratic. In autocratic regimes, citizenship means duties rather than rights, and the decision to draft soldiers and send them into battle is not made democratically. Soviet nationalism was not democratic in the usual sense of the term. Nationalism in authoritarian and totalitarian countries is often marked by mass killings and genocide, as in Tsarist Russia, Ottoman Turkey, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, and Maoist China. And even in democratic countries, nationalism has sometimes been associated with ethnic cleansing, expulsions, and ethnocide, as in the US and France. Conversely, ethnocracies, as Sami Ismoha has called them, may be democratic in institutional and practical terms. Moreover, democracy and citizenship are no longer exclusively equated with the nation, and this is old but very often ignored. There is also urban citizenship. In fact, it is the original kind. In the Roman Republic, a citizen, civis, was the free inhabitant of a city, civitas. Note that in the European Union, a person who votes in municipal elections and benefits from a country's economic rights does not have to be a member of its nation. There is also transnationalism and supranationalism. And one may ask, what is its relationship to democracy and liberty? On the one hand, supranational organizations have widened the scope of personal liberty, often beyond those of individual nations, by means of conventions and courts of human rights. On the other hand, the actual governance of these organizations is far removed from the citizen. The relationship between religion and democracy is equally ambiguous. The Bible refers to a call to proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof, and to Moses leading Israelites from slavery to freedom. It can be argued that there is no freedom without democracy, yet established religion tends to be antagonistic to democracy insofar as it is institutional. And most religious institutions have been based on hierarchical or pyramidal structures of decision-making that are far from democratic. In Judaism, there is a pecking order between Kohen, Levi, Israel. In Catholicism, between Pope, cardinals, bishops, priests, and believers, as opposed to unbelievers who are outside and deprived of salvation. And in Islam, between ayatollahs, mullahs, imams, believers, and finally unbelievers who can't get to paradise. During the Middle Ages, Crusaders were interested neither in nation building nor democracy. And in more recent times, onward Christian soldiers was a call to march, not toward democracy, but toward greater conquest for Christ. Historically, the linkage of religion to both freedom and democracy has been noticeably weak. The major religions have made a distinction between free people and slaves, or, as in the Hindu case, upper and lower castes. During the French Revolution, religion was considered hostile to both democracy and nationalism. Such characterization was too simplistic in the light of the Reformation. As Max Weber argued in his Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, there was a causal chain of individualism to capitalism, to liberalism, to democratic rule. This influential thesis was challenged by R.H. Taney in his Religion and the Rise of Capitalism, who pointed out that the first European banks were established by Catholics, not Protestants, and by Werner Sombart, who assigned a major role to Jews in the development of capitalism. The thesis was also belied by the character of certain Protestant groups, such as the Lutheran Church in Germany, which was authoritarian and closely connected with Prussian autocracy. In contrast, both socialism and liberalism are usually associated with a break with the religious establishment. This brings me to equality. It is true that in Judaism, all Israel has a share in the world to come. You, of course, know that segment in Pirkei Avot, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek b'olam haba. In Islam, all believers are equal before Allah, and in Christianity, except perhaps for Calvinism, all believers merit salvation. Yet in all normative monotheistic religion, women have occupied an inferior position, as they continue to do in most minor sects, such as the Amish, about whom Benny has written. The mitzvot Orthodox Judaism preaches. The mitzvot Orthodox Judaism preaches refer to social justice and concern for the poor, but they do not include gender equality. On the other hand, Orthodox Judaism, unlike classical reform, makes no status distinctions between lay people and rabbis, especially when it comes to conducting religious services. In 19th century France, Catholic religious establishment fought against democracy. Until the Civil War, many Christian churches in the US supported slavery. In the 20th century, the Catholic Church in Spain was allied with the Franco regime, and the Orthodox Church in Greece supported the military dictatorship. On the other hand, in post-communist Poland, the return to democracy was associated with a return to religion. But that association was unstable, for post-communist economic development also led to growing secularization, especially in the cities. Moreover, Catholicism was no longer needed as an anti-communist counter-ideology. Now, religion and the state. The relationship between state and religion can be varied, as Benny Neuberger has pointed out in a typology he presented at a conference in 2005 on dynamics of church-state relations. An expanded range of relationships would be as follows. Tsarist, our religion fused with the state. Religious leaders are part of the decision-making establishment. Tsarist Russia had this slogan: orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationalism. A rigid establishment of monopoly only one religion is tolerated, institutionalized, and enforced: Saudi Arabia. The third type, established religion in form only. Other religions have equal rights: the UK. I just came from a conference at Oxford, and of course we know that most Oxford colleges have cathedrals attached to them, and so Anglicanism is really part of that game. Another type, plural established religions, Germany. Still another type, the state is neutral, no official position vis-à-vis religions, all are tolerated, the US and Canada. Another type, constitutionally mandated secularism, French republics. Still another one, official secularism is softened by the recognition of the historic role and or cultural importance of one or more religions. India is a good example of that, and several Western democracies. Still another type, the state is hostile to religion, Soviet Union. A comparison of the present situation in the US, the UK, and France, Germany, and Israel suggests that religion continues to play a role in these countries, but that its impact on democracy is doubtful. The US, there is a formal separation of church and state, or state and religion, but a clear dominance of Christianity expressed in blue laws, Sunday closing laws, proselytizing government institutions, for example, the Air Force Academy, the use of Christian symbols in school ceremonies, the place of religion in the Republican Party, decisions of the Supreme Court legitimizing Christian symbols in public places, and the instrumentalization of Christianity for partisan goals. Catholic and evangelical leaders may insist that all believers are equal before God, but many of them support inequalities here on earth. They are, for the most part, opposed to redistributive public policies, and therefore in conformity with right-wing republicanism. The United Kingdom, in the 18th century, religion, and more specifically Anglicanism, was a central feature of English national identity. And the United Kingdom today, the Queen is still the defender of the faith, and as such appoints the leaders of both the Anglican and Scottish Presbyterian churches. Peers of both established churches sit in the House of Lords ex officio, and until a few short decades ago, government forms still ask people to list their Christian names. Now they use first names. France moved from being the eldest daughter of the church to the revolutionary call to erase the infamy, to Napoleon's consistory, and finally to the secularism stipulated in the Fifth Republic Constitution. Mauratian integral nationalism, which was rampant in the 19th and early 20th century, was both anti-Semitic and anti-Republican, as was the Vichy regime. By the end of World War II, Catholicism had been converted to republicanism, a conversion attested by the tripartite coalition of Christian, socialist, and communist parties. This change was forced upon the church because of the discredit of the regimes it had supported earlier, and because of the growing power of trade unions. The church has seemingly embraced religious pluralism, as reflected in its frequent references these days to Judeo-Christian civilization. This presumably inclusionary rhetoric really has an exclusionary agenda that is keeping the Muslims out. Although France has been officially committed to laïcité, secularity, Since 1905, the use of the calendar of saints for selecting first names to be approved by local registry offices continued until the 1960s. But even today, while France is in process of de-Christianization, there are still Sunday laws, and there is still a cross on top of the Panthéon, the temple of the Republic. When President Mitterrand died, as an official mass was held for him in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The vocabulary and cultural symbols of France, like those of other civic nations, are shot through with Christian references. This is unavoidable, for the cultures of civic nations are not antiseptic, nor can the cultures or religions of minorities be hermetically confined to the private sphere. Minarets cannot be hidden. On the other hand, these days, at any rate, since the official debate on French national identity began in November 2009, there have been expressions, even by secular socialists, to the effect that a country that has more minarets than churches is no longer France. I will pass over from Italy and Turkey, I will leave that out and get to Germany very quickly. Christianity played a dominant role in German nationalism and nationalist ideology. That is that of Treitschke, Jahn, etc. This continued even after Judaism became one of the three established religions. After the Hitler regime, the status of the three religions was restored. But there has been no similar legitimation as yet for Islam, Mormonism, or minor Christian sects. The support of Judaism is a matter of guilty conscience and international image. Christianity has been declining, but it remains part of the texture of what the Germans call Leitkultur, that is the dominant culture. There are crosses on the walls of public school classrooms, blue laws and local ordinances to protect Sunday rest. Israel. Judaism and national identity are intimately connected. Judaism was the generator of modern Zionism. At the same time, Zionism was seen as replacing Judaism, and for that reason was anathema to ultra-Orthodox Jews. Israel's Declaration of Independence contains a reference to the land as the place of origin of the Jewish people and the place where, quote, their spiritual, religious, and national identity, unquote, was formed. But not specifically to Judaism, unless the phrase, trust in the rock of Israel, bitachon betzov Israel, is interpreted as an allusion to the Jewish God. But it is argued that the Zionism that replaced Judaism has itself been replaced, or should be replaced, by a national identity which is both post-Zionist and post-Jewish. Is Israel a Jewish state or the state of the Jews, and what role should religion play? Many of those who ask this question are worried about Israel being or becoming an ethnocracy or theocracy. They often point to the US and France as models of civic nations, in which membership is not mediated by religious subgroups. French nationhood is no longer tied to Catholicism, but as Ernst Geldner has remarked, and I quote him here, the French have been granted 1,000 years to achieve this, unquote. And I believe they have not achieved it fully to this day. In the US, many continue to insist that authentic American national identity is a Christian one. Some secular Israelis are apologetic about the fact that Israel is seen as a Jewish state, a label attested by the celebration of Jewish religious festivals as national ones, the observance of Shabbat as a day of rest, the fact that Israel's national flag is based on the Talit, and so on. But neither these symbols nor a formal affirmation of Israel as a fundamentally Jewish state ipso facto implies that there is no religious equality. It should be noted that a number of European states have crosses on their flags and observe saints' days as official holidays. Christians in these countries are not defensive about this, nor are non-Christians upset about it. They have accepted it because in most of these countries, religions have been increasingly emptied of their theological content and are regarded either as folklore or as part of the national cultural patrimony or local scenery. In some European countries, kings and queens must belong to certain religions, but these monarchs have no power. Christian sects may occupy a preferential position, but this doesn't make much difference today, given the fact that most people no longer go to church regularly, if at all. In the 19th and 20th centuries, world religions began to take a back seat for unimportant reasons. Their supranational orientations no longer corresponded to the interests of citizens, who were increasingly identified with a particular modern nation as an experienced community. This sort of nation was based on popular sovereignty, which expressed itself by democratic means in increasing demands upon the state to provide concrete benefits or payoffs, rather than means to eternal salvation. This leads to the following question. As an orientation based on experience, is nationalism rational? Hans Kohn made a distinction between Eastern and Western nationalism, the latter related to a civic nation based on a free association of rational individuals. This is an ideal type definition. For not all individuals in a civic nation are rational, their nationalism is often emotional and irrational, and concrete satisfactions are not necessarily material. Bread may be replaced by circuses, and the promise of heaven by the more immediate payoff in national glory. Now, religion and democracy. Just as religious faith have appealed across nation, so membership in national communities may embrace adherents of multiple religious faiths. This is possible only if membership in a religious community is compatible with membership in the political community. This applies to the majority of religions today. There are, of course, exceptions which I won't go into, like the Neturei Karta and the Sikrikim and so on. To the extent there is an interest in religion today among political scientists, it is not focused on its theology, but on the impact of political behavior and public policy. The current concern with religion has been sparked by the growing influence of Christian fundamentalism in the US, ultra-Orthodoxy in Israel, and Islamism globally. That influence attests to a search for absolute values in the face of post-industrialism, cold functional relations, alienations, and uncertainty. Religion in its moderate form is looked upon as providing a moral guide and a spirit of community, and thus as a corrective to the individualism and amoralism of many modern societies. The biblical literalism of certain Protestant sects, however, is profoundly reactionary insofar as it is contrary to reason and science. There appears to be an analogous literalism in Islam. The results of the recent elections in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt following the Arab Spring are likely to lead to the strengthening of the official position of Islam, possibly a restoration of Sharia law, elements of which would be contrary to accepted principles of democracy and equality. Religion may be compatible with democracy if it exists in a pluralist and socio-political environment and constitutes a minority. Or as in the UK and other Western European countries, where the number of practicing adherents of the majority religion are in the minority. But that hypothesis has not been fully tested. Insofar as democracy implies rule by the people and its ability to replace one ruler by another, it cannot be easily reconciled with a higher power that is regarded as sovereign, that is not elected, and is not subject to recall. In the final analysis, coexistence between them is possible only if religion and state are compartmentalized and functionally autonomous. Thank you very much.
Please. Any question? Yes, sir.
Based on your concluding remarks, is it really possible to have this integration between religion and state? Or are we living in a perpetual state of some sort of variations of Oriental despotism, which Vogel was discussing, of some form or another, where these things will never be compatible, where there's always some kind of a ruling element that determines the way in which the life in any particular society exists?
That's a good question. Now, I conceive of an ideal type of democratic state, and of course some countries approach that ideal type a little bit better than others. For instance, if religion is considered to be a matter of civil society rather than the state, and if the state does not interfere and it says there is the practice of free association, that is associational institutions freely formed, and religious ones belong to that category, and the state has nothing to do with what goes on in civil society, then it is possible. In other words, the state does its thing and civil society does whatever it wishes to do without the one impinging on the other. This isn't always possible, but one tries to achieve it. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you consider it possible for Turks living in Germany to become Germans?
Okay, now, until the early 1990s, the Turks living in Germany were considered guest workers. And under the then existing jus sanguinis, the law of blood, there was no possibility of Turkish guest workers becoming German citizens. Therefore, they were considered a permanent diaspora, and the Germans had an interesting term called Heimkehr-Illusion. You know what that means, the illusion that all of them would eventually go back to Turkey. But since the early 1990s, the Germans have adopted jus soli and have selectively permitted individual lender to naturalize Turkish people. And so their children are then born in Germany, speak little Turkish, if any at all, and speak German. Are they considered fully Germans? As far as they themselves are concerned, yes. As far as most of their neighbors are concerned, no. Thank you. Thank you.